Okay, so we are in 1 Peter chapter 3. We have, I guess, added at least 1 week to our study in addition to the couple of weeks where we've had we've not had a class or so. So kind of looking to wrap up by the end of June. I will probably be here at the end of June, but then shortly after workshop, I won't be here. We're gonna take a trip right after workshop. So, and by the way, in our eating schedule, tonight is our regularly scheduled fellowship meal, right? Right. So that's on our eating schedule, and then next week is the VBS kickoff. We're gonna eat for that, and then the week after that, we're gonna have National Deaf Christian Workshop. So we're gonna eat for that. So, we've had a pretty. I will say thank you to everybody who's helped out with that, because we've had a pretty good response, and we have. I haven't looked at the number today, but we have almost the same number of people registered as last year. I counted as our or last time we had it here at our highest number, and my number counted everybody who was coming to the building and helping and working and stuff. So that added about 35 people there. So we're almost at the number we had last time. So we're planning on having a pretty good crowd be here. So in a couple weeks, your normal seating spot might be disrupted if you sit up front middle, so that might be disrupted a little bit because we'll move everybody up there.
I'd say I could yell at them, but they wouldn't hear.
Nope, probably wouldn't care either. So we'll probably do what we did last time and move around the podium and stuff and switch it up. But anyway, so and there's still more to be done. So if you are able to help at all, even just coming and locking up the building one evening would be a huge help. I mean, just every piece of it really makes a big difference, because there's a lot to be done. And it's very happy, doesn't she? She's probably working on something right now. Get something. Yeah. It's kind of a look at my kid's head. So anyway, so 1 Peter chapter 3 is where we're going to be today, and we'll start over here, and we'll go clockwise, and start over here with Glenn. After me, I'll kick it off. And 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious.
For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered.
Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, and tender heart, and humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil, or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit.
Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eye of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ear open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil.
Where are we reading through?
1 Peter 3:13.
I just didn't know what through. Like we're just going.
Oh, through the end of the chapter, yes.
Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect.
Having a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. For it is better, if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit, by whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient. When once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 souls, were saved through the water.
Which also, through a true likeness, doth now save you, even baptism, not putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the interrogation of the good conscience toward God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is on the right hand of God, having gone into heaven, angels and authorities and powers being made subject unto him.
All right. So, 1 Peter chapter 3. Now, last week, what I said, and we'll let it stand, we're going to talk about a little bit first 7 verses, and then we'll move on, because we've had on our Wednesday night series, we've had the men's training class and ladies training class, so I don't want to rehash stuff we've already talked about in there, so or ladies are going to talk about it in there. I can't remember if they've already done or not, but as a sidebar, that ends this week, I believe. So yeah, this week. Next week starts our summer series, so we'll all be in there on Wednesday nights. I'll be in the fellowship, or the auditorium on Wednesday nights. Anyway, so how does this start off? So if we remember from chapter 2, we talked about being in submission to authority, right? We talked about the emperor, or the king. We talked about being in submission to all of these, right? And so talked about we do that because of what Christ has done for us, right? That he gave us the example. He gave us the example of how he acted, especially when he was confronted with things and he was treated poorly, and eventually was put to death, even though he had done no wrong, right? Verse 25 of chapter 2 ends the chapter by saying, "For you were straying like sheep, but now have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." So obviously you get the idea of these sheep going around, and sheep are stupid. You got to pull them back in, you know? Sometimes I'm stupid and I got to be pulled back in, right? And so likewise, not off that last thought right there, but just off the general concept of being in submission to authority. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, that they may be won without word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. So what is he saying basically right here? I'm going to take a sip here because my kids did not allow me to finish this.
An unbelieving husband isn't an excuse not to be respectful and submissive.
Very true. What does 1 Corinthians chapter 7 have to say on it? With you have a situation here early in the church. I think we need to set this up. Early in the church, where people are being converted and they are not raised in the church, as we would say, right? You know, I mean, everyone is a new convert, and what does it say about the way that wives and husbands should interact with their non-believing spouse if their spouse is not a Christian? Well, they should conduct themselves in a worthy manner, but if they will consent to live with you, you don't get divorced over that, right? It's not, like you said, it's not an excuse to break up the relationship right here, because what can happen? You can bring your spouse over to the Lord, right? Obviously, this is not an ideal situation, you know, but say you are in this situation, the idea is you could bring someone you love, bring their soul to Christ, right? And so, obviously, difficult situation, but he's saying this here. Verse 3, "Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious." I was listening to someone talk about this and talk about how the concept of a lot of times in Scripture, don't do this, right? When you put them together in a kind of isolated context like this, a lot of times it's not saying never, ever, ever do this over here, always, always, always do this over here. It's saying do not emphasize this over here, emphasize this over here. So what I mean by that is, if we look at Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, don't lay up treasure on earth where moth and rust will destroy, but lay up your treasure in heaven. Okay, Are we saying that a savings account is inherently sinful? Are we saying that a 401k or any kind of insurance, right, is sinful? No, that's not that's not what he says, because otherwise you come into a real serious problem when you have Acts chapter 16, chapter 17, where you have some people who are affluent. You think about the church in Corinth. You have some people who actually have some money and end up saving the apostles' lives and establishing the church in the local area, right? Well, okay, they had money, but where was their treasure? Right? I think it's pretty clear where their treasure was. They put their money where their mouth is, right? And so they said, I'm a Christian, and because of this, this is where my effort and my focus is going to go into. It didn't say, I mean, if they were to give up all their material wealth, especially at this time, well, if the church is meeting in someone's house, and I give up everything I have, where is the church meeting now, right? Okay, okay, maybe we can meet outside, sure, but it's very different. If Jason gives up all his material wealth, is he able to put down and pay the bond? Essentially, he's the bondsman for Paul and his companions traveling through Macedonia. Well, what happens there? Okay, so where are you putting your money, right?
So we forget that it's not money that's the root of all evil. It's the love.
The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil.
We forget that
right.
sometimes.
Yeah, easy to shorten it, and just take out a couple words, right? But it makes a pretty big difference there. Now, obviously, when we're talking about this, is not the idea here is that not that any kind of braided hair is inherently sinful, right? It's just saying that where is your focus? Is your focus on what people can see, or is your focus on what is internal? That's the discussion right here. And I think it goes back to the first couple of verses, right? Because the people who live with you are going to see you much better than pretty much anybody else, right? So it goes back to the conduct, being able to win over an unbelieving spouse. And basically the first 7 verses here are talking about when you have one spouse who is a Christian and the other spouse who is not, right? That's essentially what this category is specifically talking about.
One thing I've found interesting, like when it talks to, there's this passage in, I think it's in 1 Timothy also, where it talks to women specifically about adornment and all that kind of stuff. And someone pointed out once that, it says be adorned with a gentle and quiet spirit. And a lot of times we think, well, I don't naturally have a gentle and quiet spirit. That's not something that's just inherently, something I'm good at. But they point out that, like, when you put on jewelry and you put on clothing, that's an active thing. And so you have to put on these qualities. You have to actively seek these qualities too. And it's humbling to think of, like where your emphasis is. If it takes me an hour to get ready every morning, but I can't find 10 minutes to focus on, adorning a gentle and quiet spirit, then what are those?
Yeah, it's very true. It's thank you. It's a lot like fasting, all right? Well, I think fasting is a valid concept. Problem is, it does not take us nearly as long to prepare our food as it used to, right? It used to be like a 4 or 5 hour job every single day to be able to eat, right? And that was on days where you already had your meat killed, right? Where you had already killed the meat, right? So other days you had to go hunt the meat and bring it in, right? So talk about fasting. You're foregoing food because it would take so much time to kill, prepare, eat, and clean up after the meal that I'm now dedicating this time to God, right? Well, okay. How long does it take for me to prepare a meal? Generally, it takes about 20 minutes of my time, maybe, to prepare a meal, right? Even if there's something that has to cook in the oven, you put it all together, you mix it up, you stick it in the oven, you leave it, right? It cooks it for you, essentially. So it's not that big of a deal. But how are we spending our time, right? I think there's a lot of ways we could fast and say like, okay, I'm going to give up this thing that I do right here, whether it be for enjoyment, whether it be really important. I'm going to take some time off of work, and I'm going to dedicate that to God, right? I mean, that's the same kind of thing. That's you are saying like, okay, well, I'm going to give this to God because that's where my emphasis is going to be, you know. And kind of to your point about a naturally having a gentle and quiet spirit, where does it go? In verse 6, right? As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. I don't think that Sarah naturally had a gentle and quiet spirit. Read through Genesis, and I don't think so, right? Why is Isaac's name Isaac, which means laughter? Because she is listening at the door, or at the door of the tent, right, to Abraham entertaining these three men, which come out to be, you know, angels, and well, that's a rabbit hole. But anyway, so he's entertaining these three men, right, and one of them says that you will have a son, and she laughs out loud, right? Literally LOL out loud, right? and it's heard, and so that's why Isaac's name is laughter. Okay, so what about Ishmael, right? This is 21. I don't think she had a very gentle and quiet spirit on that one. I understand why, but you know, you just kind of look through Sarah and you see, okay, that doesn't seem to be something that was necessarily natural to her, right? But we do have that she was an incredibly beautiful woman, right? So much so that Abraham, whenever they go around other people, is like, just tell them you're my sister so they don't kill me and try to take you as their wife, right? You know? So I think that's the point, right? Where is your focus? What are you focused in on here? And any thoughts, comments on that? All right, verse 7. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So what does this mean? I find it more likely that a man's going to step up and actually give me a comment on that one than on the first 6 verses. What does it mean? Somebody give me something.
I thought I had it figured out, and then we got a baby, so I don't know.
Well, first of all, live with your wife in an understanding way. And so, you know, the understanding way, you know, that's something I would assume there's probably a learning curve, right, for everybody, you know, every man, because you know, your interactions with other guys are just so different, right? You know, I mean, every conversation is literally from a completely different angle. Women have conversations for entirely different reasons than men have conversations, right? We have conversations to convey information.
Yeah, but the depth, I mean, even beyond that, though, that even if you're dealing with women at large, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, the conversation that you have with your wife, I mean, that is the most intimate relationship you have.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you really have to kind of, there's a lot more reading into it that you have to do than with just the rest of the world, because that's the person you're with until you die.
Exactly. Well, you know, live with your wives, right?
Yeah.
And then in an understanding way. But yeah, I think it's just a learning curve, right? You've got to figure this part out, and it's something that you have to learn about and be able to have a relationship where, on the husband's side, you're going to show understanding. Now, is this the same command that he gives women in verse 1? It's different, isn't it? Right? Because men and women are different, right? And so what is more likely to be the issue from husband to wife versus wife to husband, right? There's just naturally going to be some differences. Yes,
Is the assumption here the same as in the beginning with women, that they're unequally yoked?
I might challenge unequally yoked, So I don't think when Paul uses the term unequally yoked, he's talking about marriage specifically in that verse.
Okay.
I think he talks about marriages, religiously mixed marriages, but the idea, I think yes, you have a believing husband, unbelieving spouse, or unbelieving wife, right?
Okay.
I think that's probably what he's talking about here because, I'm sorry, I think there's some idea behind that, but I think that what he's talking about in the second part is, okay, let me back up for a second here. I misspoke. So you have a believing husband in this situation right here. Whoops. And so I missaid that earlier. And then I think that this would apply broadly to both, is what I mean. So yes, and yes to having a believing spouse right here.
Okay.
The second part of the verse obviously is saying heirs of you with the grace of life. That obviously only refers to somebody who is a Christian, right? But I think the living with somebody with understanding is another way that you can bring someone along to become a Christian, right? It's just that's the male perspective of the, be subject to your husband so that without a word they may be won over by your conduct. Same kind of thing. Live with them in understanding, right? And when you become a Christian, it should cause such a difference in your life that it's noticeable, right? So I think you think about this in like a first century context. It should be noticeable, your change, right? And so it should bring up a conversation. What is different, right? What's different about you that you act this way, right? And so I think that generally is going to come up. So
I may have heard this wrong. Was it correct that in the first century church it was dominantly female in a lot of places? I may have heard that wrong.
I don't know.
I feel like I've heard somewhere where, at least in some places, the church was largely, at least majority female. I don't know.
Well, I could see that. You think about like Lydia and the women there, and she would have been in a very unique situation. She was leading a group of women by the river when Acts chapter 16, I believe, Philippi. So she's leading a group of women there, and then she is going to travel back. I would assume she's a seller of purple, right? She would be traveling back and forth between Macedonia and Asia Minor. So she's traveling this route, and so she probably has a house in both locations, right? As a merchant, and so I could see that.
So it might make more sense that he's saying women are more likely to be in a relationship with an unbelieving spouse than a man. I mean, even today,
that would definitely be true.
If one spouse is faithful today, it's typically the wife.
Right.
It's one or the other.
So also, thinking about the world in which the first century was, they were henotheistic, which is polytheistic. We believe in a whole bunch of gods, but this one is mine, right? So you can have all your gods over there, but this is the one that I pray to, right? And so when the head of the household followed after one God, and we've talked about this before, the household concept, that it's not just your spouse and your children, it is all of your servants or all of your slaves. It is everyone who is involved, which would probably include younger siblings and nieces and nephews, possibly even cousins, or you might have uncles or great uncles, because it would pass lineage. Think about like a king, right? The same thing happened in everyone's household, was the oldest male child, the next oldest male child. Well, if you have this male child, but his father dies and his father had two younger brothers, well, those two younger brothers, I know they're a level up, but they are now subject to the authority of the oldest child of the oldest child, right? So that was the household concept. So when a household would follow after God, that was what everyone followed after, right? So typically, that's why you have a little bit less of a situation here with husbands, because when the husband converts, well, that's going to typically trickle down, right? So I think, I don't know numbers to say that there's more women in the early church than men, but I would feel like it's probably a really good guess, without seeing anything, that there's probably more women with unfaithful husbands than husbands with unfaithful wives. Just naturally, I would think that. And of course, like we said last time, it's not revolutionary as in let's go fight a war, right? But it's revolutionary in thought, this kind of idea, right? That the way that wives are supposed to treat their husbands and husbands are supposed to treat their wives, live with your wife in an understanding way. Well, I mean, in this culture, you can do what you want, all right? I mean, men in this time, we talked about this last week, could expose babies, right? You had a baby. I wanted a boy and you gave me a girl. I'll go throw her on the nearest trash heap, right? Nobody's going to stop you, right? Nobody's going to stop you from doing that. And so this kind of idea right here, live with your wife's understanding way and show honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. I think this is just physical, especially by his use of the word vessel. It's just usually used to refer to something physical. You think about the clay jars kind of concept. There's something inside that's precious, but the vessel, the earthen vessel right there. Anyway, so I kind of think this is just physically. Typically, men are stronger than women, since they are heirs with you the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. This word hindered is really interesting. In ancient literature, they use it to refer to a retreating army that destroys bridges as they retreat, so that the enemy can't follow them. Think about that. There was this old Marine, Colonel John Ripley. He passed away, I guess, a decade ago or so. But he was famous for climbing underneath a bridge on a rope and, commando crawling and placing charges all over this bridge while the Viet Cong was shooting at him and placing them in such a location and getting out and blowing up the bridge so that they couldn't be followed on their retreat out. And Colonel Taylor, KT, some of y'all know him. So he was actually on the bridge next to him. And he looked over at one point and saw him. He was like, that guy's crazy. and actually saw him there. So interesting story if you ever get to hear it directly from him looking over. Them two were together in Ranger School and everything. So anyway, but that's the idea. Like, blown up the bridge, right? So you can't live with your wife in such a way in which you are not caring for her and not meeting her needs emotionally, and then come out and be like, okay, well, now let's pray, right? Okay, well, they don't get past the ceiling. Or one guy say, that's accurate, right? I mean, that's the point here. If you are not, and you think about different ways that this same concept is applied kind of broadly. Think about in the Gospels, where you have the Pharisees being condemned because they didn't care about the people around them, right? That they just wanted people to look up to them. If we aren't treating people in a good way, and we aren't living with understanding with the people around us and showing that we care for everybody, then what are we really doing? I mean, are we really practicing what we preach?
And it's really summed up in verse 8 where the word one mind, I mean, that's from the Greek of be harmonious.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really kind of wrapping everything up with a bow right there.
And there's so much talk of unity, and I think
Sorry, I didn't remember.
No. I'm trying to remember where I heard this. I can't remember if it was last week or somewhere. Anyway, but I love them, but I don't have to like them, kind of concept, right? Really? Kind of sounds like a cop out to me, right? Oh yeah, now I remember where I heard that. But it's easy for us to try to blur some lines here, Well, I mean, isn't that exactly what the Pharisees did? Well, I'm following the letter of the law, but not exactly the spirit of the law. But that's okay, It's very similar, And sometimes I mean, sometimes we are hurt, right? I think that's fair to say. People, we don't expect that to happen, and we're hurt, and it's hard to respond in a spirit of love. But this idea of unity. Okay, so he says, finally, all of you, y'all, yous, guys, whatever you want to say, right there, have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. I don't think it's a mistake that this follows after the marriage relationship, right? Husbands and wives are going to have conflict. It is going to happen, right? But what happens on the tail end of that, right? Well, if you are doing the things talked about here, then you're going to be able to reconcile and fix things after that, right? I mean, that's just what's going to be able to happen right there if you're living this out. So I think that the same kind of idea, obviously we have a different relationship within the body as we do within our own marriages, but the same kind of idea that we can work things out, right? We should treat each other in such a way that we're not blowing up bridges behind us, right? That we aren't doing anything crazy like that, that we're able to fix this and go, okay, this hurt, but let's work through this. That's hard to do, and we don't like to do it, probably because we're very private and we don't like to share, with other people, I tend to think. So, well, I lied. I said I was gonna skim through this and anyway. Sorry.
It's
But
a meaty book, brother.
Yeah. First Peter, 2 Peter as well, is really tough to just kind of go through because there's so many concepts that get to many different things. And let's read through this next section right here. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you are called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So we have some concepts that we keep coming back to in 1 Peter. It seems like the way in which you act is going to correlate to the way in which Christ acted. Right? We're going to go from general and start going into specifics, and each time is going to bring it back and relate it to Christ. So verse 13, now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Okay, so a few things here. Who is there to harm you if you're zealous for doing what is good, right? In general, no one, right? This the way that this is structured grammatically is that this is a possibility, but it is not a probability, right? It is probably not going to happen that you are going to suffer because you are trying to zealously do what is good, right? But it is a possibility, right? So if that happens, you will be what? Verse 14.
Blessed.
Be blessed. Same word there as used in Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed, it's a like a congratulations thing. It's like congratulations. You've done what is right, and you are suffering for why? For righteousness' sake. If you're going to suffer, I mean, basically there is the accepted idea that you are going to have suffering, right? You are a human and you live here in the world, you will have suffering. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is going to happen. So if you're going to be able to choose your suffering, why don't you choose to suffer for doing what is good, for being righteous? And then brings it back around, verse 15, to Christ the Lord. Honor in your hearts, Christ the Lord is holy. And then we have this verse right here. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you the reason of the hope that is in you. And we'll pick up there next week.